Well, welcome to the latest episode of Transatlantic AI Conversations. I'm Karen Kornblue, GMF Distinguished Fellow, and joined by my co-host, Christopher Schroeder. Chris is the GMF Board Chair. He's an author, entrepreneur, venture investor. And today we are fortunate to speak with Tsiporah Fried. She is a senior advisor to the Vice Chairman of the French Joint Chiefs of Staff on Military Strategy. She leads a strategic dialogue between the French and the U.S. Vice Chairman, and she created the French Joint Staff Task Force on Artificial Intelligence. She has a distinguished career as a military strategist, serving previously as advisor to the Chief of Navy, where she led strategic bilateral talks. She was awarded the Medal of Chevalier of the Ordre National du Méritique and the Model for Voluntary Service as a Navy Reserve Officer. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Chris so that he can start.
What an honor to have you, and thanks so much for giving us the time. It's okay, Tsiporah, I'm going to start a little bit macro about AI, and then we'll bring you down into some of the areas of your additional expertise. And to kick it off, I'm just wondering, can you walk us through a little bit how to think about a French approach to AI, a bit as distinguished from a European approach, or if there is distinguishing, and how you see the strengths and weaknesses of the two?
Well, first, Karen and Chris, thank you very much for having me as your guest. I'm deeply honored to be here, and I think it's a great initiative. Those conversations in a time where there is a lot of noise around AI and a lot of talks that are not completely rational, and there is a huge need of information on what is AI and what we are expecting from it. So, Chris, to answer your question, I would say French approach is based on two axes. The first one is an ambition one. France has the ambition to be a leader at the European level, but also maybe, and we try to, at a worldwide level. And this approach is completed by a way to implement this ambition that has started, I would say, in 2017 with our first national strategy on AI. So this strategy on AI shows that, and maybe that's the specificity of French approach is the role of the state in AI and in investing and in producing and in motivating young people to develop AI. And this strategy has two phases. The first one was invest and focus on the research. And this one is, I would say, the toughest point of the strengths of France. So we have very good mathematicians, we have competencies, we have talent, and some of them are even already at the Silicon Valley that I'm thinking of Yann Lequin, of course. But so we have very good mathematicians, especially at PhD level. So it's very easy to recruit young people aged 23, 24, juniors that can gain more competencies and be able to be creative, be able to develop models of AI. So this is the first phase based on research. The second phase, which has started in 2022, was about trying to give more accessibility to AI. And this is, I would say, one of our weaknesses. It's that in the public debate, AI is not clearly viewed. There is a lot of phantasmatic dreams or phantasmatic understanding of AI. Some are very dystopic. AI is the end of the world. AI is the end of humanity. AI will transform a human being. And some are, AI will kill our work, our jobs. So this is really the pessimistic view. And the second is largely optimistic, and AI will change everything, and we'll have a growth that we'll never have, that we'll never see, that we have never seen before, etc., etc. So we need to bring rationality to this debate, but also the accessibility is not only education; it's also access itself. There is a huge fear that in developing AI, we will reinforce inequalities between the society, between generation, inequalities between social classes and some population, and also inequalities between territories. So this is something that we really have to focus on. And I would say, to go back to your second question about the strengths and weaknesses, strength is that we started also, besides the talents, we started to develop some data centers, and we start to organize funding and investment. But it's also part of our vulnerabilities, because it's not yet completely, I would say, invested by the private sector. There is not such capital risk, venture capital that exists like in the US. So it's very difficult for small startup and small firms to be able to be funded. And they look for funds in the US, in Japan, elsewhere where they can find it. So this is one of our weakness. The other weakness is maybe, I talked about the talent, but we had several reforms on the education system, and I'm really scared that the reforms, especially on mathematics, for example, will lead to us to lose our lead in a competence in science. So we have to be very careful about that. And there is a second point that I want to raise here, is that we don't have enough women involved in science and in engineering jobs and in mathematics. And this is one of our weaknesses too.
It's so interesting because there's a theme that's been consistent almost throughout this series. It has been this tension between the fact that there are important challenges that have a regulatory and legislative component, and the unleashing of talent in a very different and globally competitive world right now. And I'm wondering how you think is best, in a practical sense, that can be negotiated, because there's a risk, I think, that not only will capital not come to France because of some of the things that you have said, which will hurt its competitive nature, but some of the best entrepreneurs you have. I mean, it would be a tragedy if Mistral was to say one day it's time to move somewhere else. And so how should we think about this sort of balance between that which is an important dialogue in terms of regulatory safety, but also unleashing innovation? Because it seems to me the incentives are all about trying to protect the downside. That's how politicians often think in everywhere. It's true in America, as opposed to getting the credit for something that's a little bit uncertain, which is all the innovation that could be unleashed in what is a very different world. How do we think about that?
I think it's one of the toughest debates that we have here, and there is a French vision on that. And I think the summit that we plan to organize in 2025, the AI summit, will be about this balance to find between regulation and innovation. So first, regulation is necessary. We are facing a new technology, new developments, and especially a technology like the language models that will provide some contents. And we need to trust this technology, especially when it comes to provide some anticipation on predictive maintenance. We have to trust. We don't want our airplanes to break down or things like that. So we have to trust the AI that will provide the predictive maintenance, but also more and more AI will be used for decision-making process. And we need to be sure that the AI is certificated, that it has a non-biased data that feeding the algorithm, and that the process itself is certificate and be able to deliver the response that we can expect. But the thing is that we can, in terms of, I think we have really to make a distinction between the regulation that is necessary to build a trustful and responsible AI, and the regulation that is called to guarantee kind of ethical use of AI. And this is very different. First, myself, I don't like to talk about ethics of AI because it doesn't exist. I think technology is neutral, but the programming and the programmer are not. And there are political visions behind the models. This is the case for Elon Musk. This is the case for Sam Altman, etc. They have a vision. You agree or not, this is not, I would say, the problem, but the thing is that you know that in these terms it's not neutral. But the technology itself is neutral. That people are not. People are ethical or they are not. That's the point. So when you want to regulate this part, I think you have to be very careful, because you have to regulate the applications. For example, the facial recognition used at a social level, like China, is problematic. This is not the AI itself. It's really the use of the AI in with the idea of controlling the population. So, and the thing is that I have listened to the audition of Arthur Mensch at the French Senate a few months ago, and I think what he said was really pertinent. Is that when you have an AI solution, you have both the dark and the bright side, always. And one side can give you tremendous progress in medical diagnosis, for example. But the same AI could be used for cyber attack. So this is the thing. So regulation is needed to certificate and to trust AI. And it has to be very clear that regulation is on application. And that's maybe the problem with the AI Act at the European level. You cannot control the calculation, you cannot control the models, but you can control the applications. And this is a question of governing. I don't know if I answered.
You did very well. And in fact, that distinction on applications versus the models, I think, is very powerful, and people tend to brush off it. And I also think it's very interesting about the choices that we make with AI, because the other vertical for another conversation perhaps is that, you know, there are countries in the world that will look at data differently than the West might. Like there are things in biotech and whatever, and we just have to look at that coldly for what it is. Doesn't mean we should compromise that value, but we should know that people will compete differently because of it. And I think you're very provocative on that. And before I pass it to Karen, I just want to transition a little bit to with these themes, but in the sense of AI and the battlefield overall. And it's very interesting. I have a friend here in Washington who's very sophisticated on technology and very sophisticated, multi-year career in the military. And he said to me, you know, AI is different from generative AI. He said, on generative AI, the minute that generative AI can bring down a carrier, like then I'm going to get interested. Like I'm not yet sure how much generative AI really means in a context of defense and war, which fascinated me no end, because as you know very well, information war is very much part and parcel of war today, and I wouldn't want to dismiss it. But what's the right answer here? Like, how important is generative AI as we start thinking about defense as distinguished from AI more broadly?
Well, we are just really at the beginning of generative AI in defense, but we have identified some use that we can have. And of course, I would say you would have the common use for I would army staff, naval staff, etc. That is the business use. So assistant and being able to accumulate knowledge and deliver something very quickly based on a very big amount of documents, etc. So this is something that I would say it's the classic use of AI. And of course, talking about generative AI, we start to study it as a component of our future command and control systems. So it will be very important for several reasons. First, because we face an incredible amount of data that we never had before. We have several captors from space, from sea, from the ground, from special services, from the intel, etc., etc. All kind of sources and a huge amount of data. And no human can treat this data. So AI is absolutely expected, and it's an emergency, I would say, to be able to treat this data, to exploit the data, and to make something of it. The second part is the time. We don't have time anymore. The temporality of war is very different. And when I talk about time, it's not the time of reaction, but it's already the time of prediction and anticipation. We need to be able to make a decision before our enemy has made his own decision, has made his move. So, and this is not humanly possible. So that's what we are expected from AI, from generative AI. And then we have I would say the operational, the AI on operations itself. It's the targeting. It's helping to diffuse fog of war, helping to hide in a battlefield that is now characterized by transparency. So this is really a first approach of generative AI in the military system. And of course, there is another part that you mentioned, which is the informational war, the informational part, I would say, of AI in the war. And this is important, and I have understood that it's another question. So I don't know if you want me to answer quite a well.
You take it, Karen.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I know that you're a Russian scholar, and you know that Putin has definitely believed that information war and color revolutions are part of the definition of war. One of his top generals said war was once 80% violence and 20% propaganda, and now those numbers are reversed. How do you see it, and do you see generative AI being front and center in that kind of war?
Well, I would say, especially coming from Putin, he knows what he's talking about. And we know what he's talking about because we are under this informational attack for a long time now in France but also in Africa. But I would say yes and no. And so yes and no to the statistic. First, because yes, there is informational war is a very important part of the war. And I will come back to this later because it's so important that I want to take time to develop. But no, first, because what we are seeing today, unfortunately, we are really in a context of wars. And I would just start with the High Karabakh, for example, war. There was no informational war at that time. There was a conflict that was duration for many, many years between Armenia and Azerbaijan on this territory. And in 3 days, it was solved by the classical war. Classical, not too classical because it was tanks, but it was also the drones. But you didn't have any narrative wars, a narrative or informational war at that time. You have just the war, and and people killed and territory conquered by the forces of weapons. So that's why I say not totally, because the war, the real war, the war with weapons, with equipment, with tanks, with missiles, with ammunition, it exists, and that's what we see also in Ukraine and in Gaza. But what is really true, and what Putin says shows also his own intent, is that informational war is completely present, exists, and at a level that we have never seen before. Because it has existed in time of war. But I would say the difference is now that it blurs the frontiers between war and peace. There is no war and peace anymore. It's we are at war, always. Some is on the theater of operation. That's what we have in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Africa, in unfortunately elsewhere in the planet. But we have also this informational war that exists in the US, in France, in Europe, in especially Germany, France, because we are very much targeted. So this is, I would say, it brings a change of our paradigm, international paradigm. We are at war always, and we are, and this is what is important. And when AI comes into this, we are citizen, as a citizen, we are the first target of this informational war, and we are easy targets because we have now a new level of this this informational warfare. I would say we went from a postmodern era to a post-truth era where emotion is more important than fact. And AI, generative AI that delivers massively contents, and any contents is I would say, is the basic of this post-truth era where emotion is leads public opinion, and public opinion leads the way we approach war, the way we win or the way we lose wars. So I would say there is a production of narratives, there is a control of multi-sources distribution, multi-channels distribution. There is also a control of the effects. And I would say before you have a propaganda, you have some information, you have on the radio, etc., etc. But we change not only the scale, but the nature of informational warfare, because it has become what we call the cognitive warfighting. And cognitive warfighting is a concept that has been developed in the US for a long time, but is developed also in NATO, and we're working on that. And we're working on that because it's what the chief of the Joint Staff of the Joint Chief of Staff say, that it's a war on perceptions. It's not only that someone gives you the way to think something; it's someone who is going to manipulate your brain into thinking that what you think is what you have developed. It's your own rationality. And so this is very dangerous because we have no control on this. We have not the slightest control on this. And to tell you how much we take it seriously, it has led us to reorganize the Joint Staff, to install a structure that is dedicated to fight on real-time informational warfare. We have been attacked in Sahel directly by Wagner and by Russia, etc., where we have been under the attack of fake news, deep fakes, etc., etc., all the things that can be generated by AI, and all that can be multiplied by AI. And we have to respond. But I would say it's a very difficult struggle, because as the proverb say, the more the lie is big, the more people will believe it. And I would say once the lie is out, it's very difficult to fight it. So I think it's what really we are in a momentum of what the Joint Chief of Staff say. We need to we need to win the war before the war. And I would say it would be the equivalent of the strategic deterrence developed in the US, or the shape and deter developed in NATO. It means that we cannot only be reactive. We cannot be only waiting to respond. We have to act before it takes us. And we have to shape our strategic environment to be able to deny the access to all these lies, deep fakes, fake news, etc., etc. So it means vigilant analysis, 24 hours and 7 days a week. So I'm sorry, I've been a little long on that, but I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, yes. Tell us, beyond generative AI, this joint staff task force on AI, I'm sure that you can't go into certain details, but maybe generally you can tell us what kinds of issues you were debating and that others in other countries might be debating as well on these topics. What are the big decision points, the big implementation points?
The big issue of AI, well, I told about the C2, integrating AI in the C2, but also, well, you will have at different levels. For example, AI will be integrated also in defining the next generation of equipments, weapon programs, for example. So it will be really interesting because we will be able to, especially when programs takes 20 years, for example. So if we integrate AI, we can be able to define immediately what kind of technology must be developed for the next years, and not having a 20 years development program and an equipment that will be obsolete once it comes out. So that would be very interesting. And the third one is predictive maintenance. It will be absolutely essential because it will help to rationalize our maintenance, and it will help to reduce cost also. And it will help also to be able to exercise this maintenance on the theater of operations easily, because we will have all the logistics necessary to be on time to repair, to replace, etc. So that's what we are expecting from AI. And I don't know if you have noticed that, but we have a new agency dedicated to AI, the new military agency for defense AI, and it will be a kind of a hub. It will have a lab for creativity, but also to be able to have an eye on the open source and the models that exist elsewhere, because I think one of the great change of those last years is that the innovation is coming from the civilian sector and not from the military anymore. So we need to really keep an eye on what is going on in the private sector.
Are you worried about open models? Because I know Mistral is a big proponent of open models. They have an open model, but there's some concern that open models can be abused more easily by bad actors. I mean, I don't, at this point, there will be open models. There's not a choice. We're not talking about not having them, but some people have expressed those worries. Do you share those, or?
I think that's really the question of security and sovereignty, in fact. And it's very complicated because there is no white and black in this area, because the open model we can use it without giving our data and with choosing our own applications, and with not having to be to have a mandatory choice on one cloud, for example. So it's very interesting, and Mistral AI has developed a model that is very different from OpenAI, from the other systems in this area. But the question of security and the question of data protection is key for us, and it's a really huge debate. Not only, I would say, within the military system, but also in France in general, because we are still very reluctant to share, for example, medical data, and we are afraid to share data, financial data, etc., commercial data. So this is a question, and I would say that it will go back to the regulation question. Maybe we have to wait for the first attack to be able to respond and to be sure that we know how to respond, but we cannot choose one model over another at this stage, because each model has its own benefit and its own flaws. So, but to tell you, at the Joint Staff and in the Ministry of Defense, we are developing our own GPT, I would say, which is called Vauban, which is developed from Mistral AI model.
Fascinating. So you've been really generous with your time, and this is just absolutely fascinating. One question that we ask all of our guests is, what content would you recommend those who want to dig in deeper? Are there articles, books, podcasts, anything that folks can turn to that will help get them more educated?
Well, I would say that the last one, and it's also a friend of mine that I have invited several times at the Joint Staff, who is a young searcher, young politologue, I don't know how you say in English, Mrs. Asma Mala. And she has just published a book from her thesis, which is Technopolitique. Comment la technologie fait de nous des soldats. I hope it will be in English. I will translate the title, Technopolitics, and how technology has transformed us into soldiers. So it's really interesting because it's a global vision on the technology competition, and on how technology has changed the international order. So really, I would really recommend it. And I will recommend the one that I would say the first one I read when I started to work, and when I started to be interested in those questions of emerging disruptive technology and AI, which is, of course, the classical Ghost Fleet from Singer and Auguste Cole. So, and this is just a pleasure of science fiction. So. Wonderful. And I would recommend a third one, which is to disconnect completely from tech and from the period, the very anxious period that we are living in. It's Klondike Tales from Jack London.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you very much.